Produced from the Cube Studios, this is Strong by Science. In-depth conversations about science-based training, sports performance, and all things health and wellness. Here's your host, Max Schmarzo.
All right, guys, I'm here today with Dr. Teddy Willsey, also known as Strength Coach Therapy. For a little known fact, Ted and I actually go pretty decently far back in regards to the social media world. Teddy was a huge help when I first started and I was making my page. He's been putting out some awesome material online. He's been helping athletes um, numerous occasions over the years, not just as a PT, but as a strength coach. He has an awesome background in regards to a holistic approach. So when we're talking about a physical therapist, I think there's some connotations that come with it. At times, people only think rehab, rehab, rehab. Well, Teddy really comes from a strong strength and conditioning background, and he does a great job of melding those two worlds. Teddy, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Dude, happy to be on. It's gonna be
It's,
fun.
uh, it's going to be great. Teddy actually came out and visited me the other, what's it, like a month ago? And little known fact, Teddy pulled a massive PR on his trap bar deadlift. And I don't want to say it was because I was around, but I'm common denominator.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
no, for guys who don't know Teddy, Teddy's an awesome guy. He super well versed in multiple domains. He has the ability to articulate exactly why he does things in a way that makes sense to myself. And that's one of the reasons why I really want to have him on, because he's able to express and share why he takes the approach he takes, and not necessarily why it's super unique, but why it makes sense for what he's doing. Teddy, you have really prided yourself, and this is where I think you've distinguished yourself quite a bit in the community, is in regards to bridging the gap between strength and conditioning and rehab. And I kind of want to ask you what that means for yourself, and also why did that come about, and why it's so important to you.
Oh man. I think that bridging the gap is such a challenge that we have because so many athletes are in this kind of gray area. They're in the in between. They have these kind of open-ended injuries or things that they're working on, whether it be a sore knee or an ACL that they tore last year, but they're not 100%. Um, and so the issue is that who we don't have somebody in place to take care of that person that's kind of in the middle. And oftentimes that would be your athletic trainer, the training staff in a collegiate or professional setting. In a high school setting, a lot, which is the majority of what I work with, majority of athletes I work with are high school. These kids are just kind of out there floating in space. They get, let's say you're rehabbing ACL, you get discharged from PT at 6 months. What are you going to do for the next 6 months until you are close to your 100%? We know from outcome data from research that really athletes aren't 100% after an ACL until about 3 years, 2 to 3 years. And what I'm trying to do is bridge the gap in a way that I can help strength coaches to stick with what their job is and actually train their athletes and not have to kind of guess and get all fluffy with a lot of the corrective work, because that's not really their job. And if they're not loading their athletes, they're not putting their best foot forward as coaches and their training and background. So I'm trying to get strength coaches kind of out of that realm, and then also have physical therapists understand a little bit more about how to bring an athlete further along in into the arms of the strength coach. So we're trying to kind of help everybody to do their own jobs and keep this separation while building this bridge. So it's not that I want all physical therapists to be strength coaches, and it's not that I want strength coaches to know how to rehab their athletes, because that's not their job. I want everybody to kind of respect each other and communicate. And no matter what setting you're in, private sector, public sector, like, communication is the most challenging thing that we have. And I know that's what you guys are really trying to fix or to address with Resilience Code and your big group of professionals, interdisciplinary communication under one roof. But that's my goal, and that's really where I think that I can help make a difference and speak both sides' language.
Yeah, that brings up a really important point that I don't know if everyone listening to this gets. So when someone gets hurt, typically they'll go see their physical therapist, and we're going to assume in this setting it's a private setting, so you're not in a school. And then you go to a physical therapist, and then you segment and go to a strength coach, so you go back to your performance. But the communication between the two isn't always there. And Teddy, if I get it correctly, you're kind of talking about how, as a physical therapist, can I think like a strength coach so I know where they need to be to actually to be ready to perform in the weight room and on the field. And then at the same
Right.
time, how can I, as a strength coach, think like a physical therapist so I know where they came from and I know how to properly load the athlete? Is that kind of the bridge we're
Mhm.
talking about here?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, kind of you alluded to this at the beginning. We don't want I don't want to sit here and bash physical therapists. Uh I think that my profession has a lot of growth, or a lot of room for growth in the athletic performance area. But the reality is that I think that a lot of the responsibility here falls on the rehab professionals, the ATCs, the PTs, to better understand the needs of an athlete and to help prepare them and make them more resilient so that they can get back to playing. Simply fixing pain isn't a good barometer. We need to kind of move beyond that to the second that your hamstring doesn't hurt doesn't mean you're ready for high speed running again. We know that you need repeated exposure to high speed bouts of running. Um, who's going to help them do that? Who's going to help the athlete? I see this all the time with soft tissue injuries where you go back onto the field and you might be okay at first, but that cumulative stress will break you down. And again, the bridging the gap just comes down to, like you said, Max, the coach, the sport coach, the strength coach, appreciating or understanding that that athlete maybe not 100%, and you know the physical therapist also being able to communicate with them. I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than those sport coaches that they kind of have this mindset. Well, if you're not 100%, I don't want you out here. Come back when you're 100%. And it's like it's just not that simple. And so, and they need that exposure to the competitive environment to know that they're 100%. There's no way that they'll know that until they get that repeated exposure. So I go through this time and time again. It's really challenging. I'm always reaching out to coaches, and I'm in the private industry and reaching out to different ATCs at different schools and trying to create that communication.
Yeah, I like how you brought up, pain is not our barometer. And I
No.
like that from a multiple standpoints too, because right, pain is whether you or not you want to talk about pain in regards to how you perceive pain, because that's one thing versus actual pain, tissue
Mhm.
disturbance. And for those listening, there's the idea that our brain associates a region of the body with pain. They kind of call that pain science or nociceptive. I'm not versed enough to dive into it, but it's the idea that our brain is telling our body it's hurt despite it not actually being hurt. And the other aspect is pain because of tissue disturbance. So there's actually something going on in the tissue itself, which is causing a problem. Now, in regards to that, you said it's not just pain, but it's the aggregation and the accumulation of repeated stresses that allows the tissue to be resilient, right? You're talking about, oh, you get back on the field. Well, that's great, but you're going to be running more than once on the field. So, how, as a physical therapist, as a strength coach, do we address the situation of making sure our athlete isn't just ready from a pain standpoint, but from a tissue tolerance standpoint?
We address this. I use this analogy all the time. Whether you are learning something for the first time or you're rehabilitating, you need a a periodized and methodical approach to loading. And so if somebody's coming back from a hamstring injury, let's say a hamstring tear, a really kind of aggressive injury, they're not going to just linearly come all the way back the same way that we don't linearly train anybody. They're going to need kind of ups and downs, undulations. They're going to need times where they overreach and times where they allow that stress on the body to decrease and really kind of realize their gains. And if this rehab process is 2 to 3 months, we have plenty of time to really kind of plan that out. And then, of course, kind of roll with the punches because there's always unexpected symptoms, stuff happens, that's just part of the game. But it's this kind of higher level approach where we approach an injury with a training mindset that I think is extremely important. And it's just, physical therapists they don't talk about this stuff. They're not educated on it in school. It's not part of the board exam. And physical therapy is a huge profession. A lot of us do the exact opposite of what I do. They're working with people with strokes and spinal cord injuries and Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis, and it's extremely important. But we come out of school with this just gross general degree that doesn't really allow us to specialize in anything. So
Yeah,
that's the
and I
challenge.
think an aspect which is unfortunate about physical therapy, it's nothing to do with the individuals. It's more of a bureaucracy issue, is the insurance aspect, right? Where
Oh my
if you're
gosh.
seeing
Yeah.
a physical therapist and you're seeing them based on insurance, well, if your knee's what's hurt and it's being caused by a hip and maybe a shoulder issues, well, I can only really treat the knee, right? I'm filing my codes and I need to get reimbursed for my actions to make sure you're not paying, out of cash, out of pocket. I need to make sure that as a company, that I am acting on the part and area that you came for to me, despite the fact there might be other areas involved. And so when you work in a cash pay system, it's different because a cash pay, you have a lot more autonomy because you're treating it much more as, hey, here's my physical therapist, but I'm not going to, trust insurance to tell me what's best. I'm going to trust you to tell me what's best. And I'm going to provide you with the money for reimbursement of what you need to do. And so when we're talking about this, there's two models, and distinguishing those two models are important because in the insurance-based model, unfortunately, the freedom it's difficult. It really is.
Yeah.
And you don't even get a whole hour. It's a half hour, right? It depends how you're doing the billing. Versus a cash-based model, you have much more freedom to really take care of the body holistically versus, I need to get my codes in so I can get, reimbursed and make sure that you don't have to pay, cash for something you don't want to pay cash with. In regards to that, and this is kind of an opinion question, how do you see someone maybe in that insurance model applying a more holistic approach? And then what's your opinion also on insurance versus a cash-based model?
So I spent the first year of my career as a PT working in an insurance model. I knew the entire time I was going to go cash. It was just a matter of when. I think that in the insurance model, you have to kind of fudge the books a little bit. Sometimes you have to justify to yourself first and foremost. If you feel as if you are acting in a moral and ethical way and putting your patient's interest first, I think that you can do other things outside of that body part. And sometimes, like you said, Max, it comes down to something silly like, um, can I strengthen this person's hip when they have a knee issue? Of course you can. You can pull up a million articles that show the importance of proximal strength for distal stabilization. And you see that at the hip all the time, even from an athletic standpoint to people with osteoarthritis. Strengthened hip helps the knee. The issue is when somebody comes in and they say, okay, now my left foot hurts, but you're treating their right side. That can be challenging. That can also be challenging because maybe you don't have the amount of time that you're spending together to fully address both issues. So the way that I would handle that, and I still typically do this, even though I'm in a cash-based model and I can treat anything I want, I still typically will explain to patients, look, I want to give this one body part or this one concern of yours uh, the entire due diligence that it deserves. And if we have extra time or if we want to see each other a little more frequently to work on your shoulder on the other side, maybe we can, but I want to focus on the knee first. And that kind of comes down to individuals and whether they're going to do stuff on their own versus that they need me to babysit them. And so, and the second part of your question, kind of cash versus insurance, I think that you're going to find that more and more physical therapists like myself are going to the cash pay model, not because we're raking in the dough, but more just because it's the only way that we can be entrepreneurs. And it's the only way that we can bring in clients on our own. If we had to certify ourselves with all of these insurances, we might have to wait 6 months of business ownership before any of the insurances even paid us. So we would have to go 6 months into debt And physical therapists, compare what we make to like a lawyer who goes to school for the same amount of time, we're making pennies on the dollar. So it's not a profession, just like strength coaches for most of them, it's not a profession you go in for the money, you go in for the passion. And most physical therapists, I think, are pretty passionate about their job, but they're kind of held handy or held handcuffed by the insurances and the bureaucracy. And that's, I mean, dude, it's a problem with healthcare across the board. It's not just physical therapy. And that's, it's a problem with our country, not to get into politics, but just, how much it's a big issue. It's a big political football for the elections, for all that stuff. Healthcare, it costs a lot of money. And, I think that one of the populations that kind of slips through the cracks are athletes because, like we said, a lot of healthcare is not the practitioners are not trained to help athletes, and athletes have a totally different set of rules and prior level function that they need to get to. And there's language in a lot of these kind of insurance guidelines and what they'll pay for that once somebody is kind of functioning at a normal level below their athletic level, they can't get reimbursed by insurance anymore. So there's all those things that kind of are piled against athletes trying to get medical help in rehab.
Yeah, and something that you brought up as well was the aspect that on a cash pay program is you can do things that are scientific that might not be recognized by insurance. What I mean by that is you can use different pieces of technology. You can use 3D motion capture. You can use different force plates, whatever what you need to provide the best tools possible. And so the money side, it's also funding a facility that might be more suited to providing the best care possible. And so because
Right.
you're on a cash pay and you might be making maybe more money than on an insurance model, well, you can buy better equipment now to provide better services. And
Hmm.
like you said, it's an entrepreneurial system because at the end of the day, no matter how you twist it, it's about your client and about you providing the best thing for them. Otherwise, they won't come back.
Yeah.
And so the idea of having that that entrepreneurial push to provide, okay, how do I provide the best service, right? It's not, oh, I'm Ebenezer Scrooge and here's my money and I'm going to sit in my tower, but it's here's my money and I'm going to now, I need to buy equipment because I can provide better motion analysis and X, Y, and Z. I don't want to go on that rant because that's something
Yeah,
I think you and I
yeah.
would enjoy talking about for about 2 hours, but I'm not sure if everyone else wants to dive into it. One of the things you did mention was the athletic population. And I know in the athletic population, returning to life is not really what they're interested in. They're returning to performance, right? Their life is performance. And so if I'm a basketball player, Teddy, thanks, you got me to walk again, but I need to jump
Yeah,
48
yeah.
inches and I got to play, 3 games this week. When it comes to that situation with an athlete, high school, professional, middle school, weekend warrior, whoever it is, because that mindset, again, is probably the same for all those athletes. How do you go about the not just the design and selection of your periodization, but also the actual modalities and the exercise you put into the program to make it specific to that person?
I mean, it's really this is where the kind of the bridge the gap idea comes from. It's similar to how I was taught how in 2007 at University of Pittsburgh in exercise science, one of our projects was to write a training program for, and I think I chose rugby. At first, the first thing you do is you look at what are the kind of the biomechanical and range of motion demands of their sport and of their specific position. What are the energy system demands? How frequently are they going to be playing and practicing? What's their yearly schedule? And when you factor all of those things in, that's how you can create the rehab program the same way that you would create a training program. And I'm paying attention to all of those things, especially as we get closer to return to sport. If I have a basketball player with an ACL, they're going to be doing very different conditioning at the end of our sessions than a American football player would be, for obvious reasons, the difference in energy system usage. So, I think that it just comes down to taking the time to understand what that person's goals are and then working backwards to tailor fit the program to them. And same thing goes for the weekend warriors. I mean, they're usually a little bit easier in terms of their goals, but the athletes are the ones that have these very specific demands for their sport.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one of the things you talked about is, right, not just movements, but energy systems. And we're not just talking about, oh, can I get the leg stronger? Can I get it functioning at a higher velocity and a higher output repeatedly over and over again? And so for people who maybe haven't gone through rehab, I have numerous times, unfortunately. Um, the aspect that Teddy's kind of talking about is that gray area between, strength coach, between physical therapy, especially on depending what model you're in. And unfortunately, most sport coaches don't recognize a gray area. And if you're on the court, you go 100%,
Yeah.
regardless of if you want to go 100% or you should go 100%. And I like the idea of taking that ownership, Teddy, and really finding that middle ground, because I think people say, "Oh, let's bridge the gap." And what the hell does that mean? Like, okay, like give me some definition. I think
Right,
you
right.
put a really good definition behind it. It's that gray area where you can start to meld, some of those strength conditioning practices, but into a traditional physical therapy model that allows you to really fully repair and heal tissue. Um, with that being said, there's been a big push, I guess, over the past 5 to 10 years on prehab, right? People are talking about prehab. Um, you're obviously well versed in this area, and I wanted to get your take on prehab because I've seen your Instagram, and for those who aren't following, all 7 people in this world who aren't following Teddy, um, go check him out because he talks quite a bit about you need to lifting weights is prehab. It's just the band and doing some ankle mobilizations. It's being strong, being robust, and being resilient. And I really love that take. So I'll let you kind of take it away, talking about how you define prehab and what it really means.
Yeah. So, the courses that I teach on my own and with Jacob Harden are called Prehab 101. And we chose that name not because we are getting people in a room to teach them corrective exercise for 2 days. We chose that name because it resonates with people. And like you said, it's popular. But we approach prehab in a different way. We think that, the most important thing that you have to account for is load. Total stress is something that we can manipulate, we can affect based off of the training program, the practice schedule, etc. And it's something that we know more than, or we understand more than almost anything else, is linked to injury. There's not great data out there about range of motion and biomechanics and how that links people to injury. The functional movement screen has zero reliability in terms of, or validity rather, in terms of predicting injury. And so prehab in this sense, and this really, it applies more to kind of like lifters and recreational athletes and people that have control over their programs, because if you're an athlete you don't always have control, or you usually don't. But prehab refers to these ideas of monitoring stress, appreciating the cumulative load that has this effect on your body, and also kind of figuring out ways to check back. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is what are the different markers of fatigue, and how can we use those to help our dictate our training. So like an example would be, Max, some of the experimental work that you've done with like kind of testing physical readiness, and or even if I just use like the G flight and tested vertical jump, and I use that as something to kind of mark my readiness for the day. That is a version of prehab. Anything where you are kind of forward thinking and trying to avoid rehab or stay healthy is prehab. And sometimes it's as simple as, okay, I've got like a pec tendon or proximal bicep tendon issue. Let's floor press for the next 3 weeks, and then we'll go back to the barbell. Sometimes it's just these little changes that can make a big difference, and it's not always about 7 different exercises to fix your biceps tendonitis. And so, but that's kind of what we have to put on Instagram sometimes, and that's what gets clicks, and so that's the whole tricky line. But prehab, man, is just appreciating cumulative stress of the body, making small changes when you can.
I really like that definition because it's encompassing. And I think socially we think prehab and TheraBand and Bird Dog and a glute hip bridge are the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
three things that come up. But really, everything we do is prehab because we
absolutely.
never want to go to rehab. And that's why when you look at some of the models that you present in regards to, I'm gonna, lifting in general is prehab. It's prehab to avoid death, even. Like it's the ultimate prehab. Exercise is medicine. And when we look at the small adjustments you can make, it's the ability to work around maybe disturbances in your capacity and being intelligent. So I really like the example you gave with the bicep tendonitis and or shoulder issue, and maybe we're going to floor press versus bench press. Now, in someone's mind, they might say, "Oh, if we're floor pressing, that's not prehab. That's lifting." But really, it's that small adjustment and being aware of what you're dealing with at the
Mhm.
time that is prehab, and that's a model you can take and apply universally. That makes nutrition prehab, right? And what's so beautiful about the definition you gave, Teddy, and not to go on too big of a rant, is that prehab becomes synonymous with performance, and it should be, because
Absolutely.
performance avoids rehab when you're optimal. And if we're avoiding rehab, then what's the difference between prehab and performance? I love
Right,
that
right.
definition.
Yeah, and, kinda going back to the bridge the gap conversation, that's where the stubborn strength coach that is unwilling to make small modifications based off of injury or pain, kind of ends up, up the creek without a paddle or whatever down the what I'm bad at phrases. But that's where they just end up in a bad position because they're not willing to modify, they're stubborn and they're not appreciating this cumulative stress idea and this prehab idea of making small changes when it's necessary. So it could be the coach that won't let any players box squat, but you've got somebody with hip impingement and that free squat or that deeper squat's just really kind of beating them up, and so there's all these small modifications that we could make. And I understand that that's challenging sometimes for a coach that, let's say, they have 20 athletes at once, and they're the only one responsible for them. It's challenging to make those modifications, but that's where kind of bridging this gap. Maybe that athlete doesn't need to not lift. Maybe they don't need to just be in the athletic training, um, be on the training table for an hour. Maybe they can do these small little things to train around injury, train through injury. And so that's a big part of what I teach and talk about in those courses, and doing a couple talks this spring at some different kind of strength and conditioning settings. And that's a big part of my focus is how to train around injury, continue to train, because if you're not training, something else is going to lag behind as well. And that becomes a whole nother issue. The guys that tweak their hamstrings after they come back from ACLs, or you come out of a boot and then your Achilles is jacked up. And so, like, anything that we can do to continue to challenge the organism while they're injured is important as well. And that falls into the prehab category.
For those listeners that aren't super familiar with periodization, and this is, I promise you, on topic. It's typically very rigid by tradition. In 8 weeks, we will do this. And it's kind of like, well, I don't even know if it's going to be sunny in eight. I don't know. Am I going to be sick? There's so many things we don't know. And I think we see a lot of this happens a lot in general public, Gen Pop, where they go online, and I love a lot of the fitness, doing a good job providing information, but they might provide a workout, oh, the big chest workout and or the big arms workout. And they'll see it and they'll say, I have to do these exercises for these reps. But what you're saying, Teddy, is let's take that concept and let's be flexible, because right now people are so concerned with longevity. That's the thing that comes up quite a bit. Oh, how can I function well when I'm older? How can I, be able to play baseball or basketball with my grandkids? And a lot of it, I think, comes down to, and you hit on this very well, is let's let's be logical, right? Let's be flexible. Um, and yes, obviously, working out and exercising is very important. And if we know exercise is important, and nutrition is important. We'll just stay on exercise for the sake. Exercise is important. And we know we need to continue to exercise and find ways to make exercising an option. So while there might be issues that come up, I think you would agree with this that a lot of the issues come up because we're almost stubborn and we fight through the warning flags instead of
Mhm.
being flexible and really, maybe a deep squat isn't best fit for me at this current moment. Maybe at some point in time it will be. If we're talking about longevity, and if you really want to dive into the science, right, the more muscle mass you have, the less percentage you are likely to die. Like, there's a direct relationship to all cause mortality. So, all it's obviously important for function health. Okay, well, we need to find a way to exercise. And what you talked about, Teddy, is like, let's be flexible. Let's allow us to exercise, train, and have performance throughout our life because we're not being rigid. I really like that because for people who just introduce this area, they see workout, I have to follow. I don't know how many times I've gotten tendonitis from doing that, whether it's in my knees or in my biceps, because I've said I have to jump or squat today. Like,
Yeah,
I really
yeah,
like that.
absolutely. It's one of those things that it's not always the role of the strength coach, and I had touched on that a little bit, that sometimes, let's say you have 20 athletes in the weight room and you're the only coach, you don't have time to spend 20 minutes one-on-one with one person experimenting with foot positions for their squat. But that's where the gray area comes in. And can an athletic trainer help with that? Can a therapist, which there are none in college, don't even get me started on that, but can a therapist help with that? And so that's where I think that kind of that bridge the gap needs to happen. And I talk about in some of the talks I give, I talk a lot about like the physiological benefits of training too, and what happens when we detrain. Things shrivel up pretty quickly when we detrain. Um, and so that's it's extremely important, even if it's like a heavy sled drag, something to get people to expose people to higher heart rates. It can really help to maintain physical fitness when you're hurt for a little bit. And you see this especially with an athlete that, like, they're out for 2 weeks. They can't just hang out for 2 weeks if they're going to be right back on the field. And so it's really it's somebody's job on that staff to get creative and figure out how to train them as much as they can.
Yeah, one of the questions I have for you is in a situation where someone might have an injury and they're working with a trainer or strength coach, how do you feel about still seeing physical therapy, but in conjunction with getting that workout? Because, like you said, working around what you can, but maybe there's certain soft tissue work the physical therapist can do. There's certain specific understanding of that, local tissue itself that can better help the healing process than just train around. How do you see those two kind of working together?
I mean, that's the ideal model. Unfortunately, it just doesn't happen as much as we would like. I've spoken to people in professional organizations that don't have that sort of communication across the hallway, and their medical staff doesn't let people go to the strength coaches until they feel that they're cleared, because they don't trust the strength coaches. That's the only explanation for it. There are some places that I've spoken to. I have a buddy who's in college who has a really good relationship with his ATCs, and they have what I would consider to be maybe like a model program in terms of their communication. So it really just comes down to the individual program and what they can kind of, the kind of trust and rapport that they can build. But here's a perfect example. If somebody has a hamstring strain, once they're beyond that kind of acute inflammatory pain period, they could be pushing a heavy sled. That's a primarily a quad dominant movement, especially if you march in a certain way. Whereas dragging the sled is going to be more of a hamstring dominant movement where they dig their heel in. So there's all these little modifications. If somebody has a hamstring issue, they can probably do, let's say you do like a band running in place or like it's kind of like a high knees in place. They could do that maybe a week or two before they could even jog sometimes, because of the horizontal force that happens with the hamstrings. Whereas if you're just kind of pogoing up and down, that's primarily quads, similar to the acceleration phase of sprinting. So there's all these kind of little things that we can break down, like you said, to not challenge the local tissue in a specific way, but to challenge the global person. And that's where I kind of break it down into GPP versus SPP, and the strength coach managing the injured athlete has this GPP role if they can create that and have that relationship where they can help the athlete with everything else, and then the medical rehab staff can help with more of the local tissue. And then as that athlete progresses more towards returning to sport, the local and the global combine, because that's when your number one goal is, okay, can they run full speed, change direction, et cetera, if we're talking about lower extremity injury. And that's where maybe the sport coach starts to get in on this too, if they can somehow help an athlete to take scout team reps or to do a 50% practice, that sort of thing. But that's challenging with some sport coaches too. They're like all or nothing. And the all or nothing mentality is like old school, man. We just don't have time for it anymore. It's not, they don't appreciate the nuance. They don't appreciate the small details, and it's a lazy way of thinking.
Yeah, and for those not familiar, what Teddy's talking about in GPP is the general phase, so the global aspect, and the SPP would be the therapist working on that specific tissue that's injured. And Teddy, we've talked about this a couple times. In regards to technology, I have an athletic training background, and we've talked about assessing someone's ability and kind of the archaic ways of manual muscle testing, where it's for those not familiar, yeah, it's great. Don't get me wrong; it has a purpose. But what typically is done is someone will press against
The
your
purpose
hand
is
and
to make
then
sure that the person's alive. That's really the only thing you can ascertain for a manual muscle test.
yeah, we're measuring essentially how strong isometrically you are into my hand, and it's rated on a 1 to 5 scale. I guess 0 to 5 technically. Zero being not moving, I'd assume, dead,
Yeah.
like you said. And the issue is that if I were to say 3 versus 4, well, that's a 20% difference. And so you've talked about the need for technology to be embedded into physical therapy and how it needs to not change it, but help guide the practitioner's decisions, right? Augment them, not override. And I want to hear about maybe how you use technology. Where do you see the future of technology being used inside of the physical therapy setting, whether it's 3D motion analysis of force plates?
Yeah.
And what specifically are you excited about, I guess, coming up, or what would you hope to see in the near
Oh
future?
man. I love this question. I love this question. So one of the biggest issues, and there's a paper circulating right now where I don't know the numbers and the power of the study, so I don't want to quote it, but they said that I haven't read it yet, but 23% of athletes in this paper actually pass return to sport criteria for ACLs. So you do the math, 77% of athletes are not passing this return to sport criteria. The issue is that a lot of them aren't even put through this battery of tests to begin with. And so the issue that we have with return to sport testing is that oftentimes we just kind of ask the athlete, you good? And obviously they're going to say yes. We do some sort of kind of like gross strength testing with our hands, or some arbitrary number like, oh, they can hamstring curl this now, but they could only do that before. And now they're doing the same. Their 10 rep max is the same on both sides, whatever. And then we kind of put them out in practice. What we need is more objective data. And so, because I talk about this all the time, like you cannot just trust your eyes. The coach's eye is again another lazy way to not use objective data. And everybody has a coach's eye. We can't trust everybody's opinions. We're humans. We are simply mere mortals. And so the issue here is that we need more technology, and it's just not in physical therapy clinics, and it's not part of the curriculum. So like one of the really helpful ways that we can judge single leg strength would be a single leg mid thigh pull, and that's something that we could use an inline dynamometer and just look at kind of these gross differences from side to side. And I guarantee you a lot of athletes are out there playing with fresh ACLs that aren't even at 90% for a mid thigh pull from one leg to the other. With ACLs, we have a battery of jumping tests and that sort of thing. Those are helpful, certainly, but more technology is better as long as we're able to use the data points. If we get so much data that we can't use it, that's not very helpful. But so we've got kind of a mid thigh pole with an inline dynamometer. We can use a handheld dynamometer to measure isometric strength as well as eccentric or concentric strength if if we can resist it. We can use a Kaiser air machine to measure power. So using a Kaiser air squat, or you could hook somebody up to a belt on the Kaiser on the functional trainer of the Kaiser and have them do some sort of power movement. We can use vertical jump mat, G flight, that sort of thing to measure single leg vertical jump. And so these different technology points are going to allow us to better predict and kind of triage our return to sport decision making, so that we again don't leave it up to our eyes and jump tests. Because one of the big things on jump tests is the movement quality, and we grade movement quality. Movement quality is not an objective measure, and we're we're too far along in technology to still be using stuff like that.
That is, it brings up, kind of opens a can of worms, and I promise I won't dive too far into it. One of the things that I immediately think about is how useful would it be, Teddy, for you to get that athlete's baseline if the strength coach, wherever they were, had it prior to,
Yes.
so they could then give you that baseline. So when you retest and continue to work with them, you know where to get them to where they were, right? And that's one of the issues I see is the lack of a common thread. And I think people go, oh, technology's useless. It could never replace a coach's eye. No shit. Like, I'm not trying to. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
please tell me right now, quantifiably, what your athlete's strength, speed, and speed strength qualities are, and tell me their asymmetries between each leg. And you say, oh, but that's not important. But I say, okay, I get that. But if they get hurt, how do you know where they're back to where they were? Because you
Right,
could
right.
argue to the world's end that you could never profile an athlete to understand the prediction of their success. And so people go, oh, technology will never tell me if they're good. I said, you're right, it won't. But it can tell you where they were. And so it would give your Teddy so much more ammo to then get
Oh my
them
god.
to where they were. And imagine how effective that would be. So what you're doing is awesome because you're having this technology driven, data driven approach to rehab. And then if we really want to bridge the gap, right, we can't have one side built with steel and the other side built out of, rinky dink wood of the same bridge because we need to handle the same traffic. And so what you're talking about here and what you're doing and leading by example is okay, let's take that, the data approach to measure progress, right? You said, I'm not trying to, you know, change my whole rehab because of it. I just want to know a little bit more to know if they're ready. I think
Yeah.
if these two communities could really come together, if there are facilities where someone could go to and get that baseline, and maybe you don't use it, and hopefully you never do use it. Like, I don't want to go to get my blood work for my doctor to tell me I need meds, right? We don't want that, but we still get our blood work. So I like the idea of having, some sort of a movement, a quality baseline. And we're talking about performance, longevity, and health. That would arm you with so much more information.
Mhm. That's actually, I mean, that's a fantastic idea, and that's something that programs that have more funding and that sort of thing should definitely be looking into. And there are certain software companies out there that are working with force plates, and they're trying to predict injury and that sort of thing. And I think that some people they're taking it too far. Just like with the FMS, it's very difficult to predict injury. But if we have these baseline numbers and we know how to help them recover from injury, that's incredibly powerful data.
Yeah, and not to be horribly biased, because I'm about to be right now, and just shamelessly plug myself. Right. That's kind of where our company Exergo stemmed from about making portable and affordable technology to allow coaches to have access to this kind of information because it can be
Absolutely.
universally shared. And if we want to talk about the issues of HIPAA, because HIPAA then makes you have to sign a waiver if we're going to share, this information. And at times, HIPAA does more harm than good. We're talking about athlete wellness because it takes 9 years to get someone's information that you needed, 5 days ago, kind of deal. But the idea of, again, having that technology to allow for assessment and baseline, it doesn't just give it vertical power in regards to, oh, I can measure their performance increase. But it's horizontal because now it can talk to you, it can talk to their primary care, it can talk to all of us and create this common thread and language between us all.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it's
I think
very
that there's a lot of
go
future in
ahead.
it, and I think that there's a lot of future in technology, and again, and like you said, it just comes down to price. And a lot of the stuff is extremely expensive. There's not a ton of people out there looking to buy it, and it's almost like this concierge approach to healthcare, and uh, only a few athletes or a select few get access to that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to disregard this too because we talk about technology, but it's so important the human side as well. 'Cause I remember in my athletic training uh, schooling that there's a famous ACL test. I don't remember who did it, so I can't quote him. It was had to jump off a box and land, and the practitioner only looked at whether or not they hesitated to jump. Right? They didn't actually look at the landing, the movement. They looked at the athlete's perception of their performance, their predicted perception. Are they going to pause before they jump? And you've talked about this in some of your previous posts and podcasts and writings. It's that human side we need to care about too. Technology is great. The human side, where, are they nervous? Are they stressed out? What are we putting on their plate on top of their injury already? And if you could talk a little bit how you handle I think you referred to as the therapist side of physical
Yeah.
therapy.
That's
That's
that's the
awesome.
coach's eye, man. That's the coach's eye. That's the role of the coach. The role of the coach isn't to determine objective things with their eyes. The role of the coach is to connect to the person across from them, and understand kind of what makes them tick, and how they feel about their physical readiness, how they feel on a day-to-day basis, what's going on in their life. One really easy basic thing that we use is called the ACL RSI, Return to Sport Index. It's 10 questions. Each one has some form of kind of confidence, or like understanding the effect that this is having on their life. One of the questions is, how frustrated are you by your injury? 0 to 10. And we see that that stuff is pretty accurate. That ACL RSI, we tell our athletes, we're like, look, please answer this honestly. There's no reason to fudge this. We track this over time, and by the time that they're ready to go back, their RSIs look that way as well. And it helps them. It's a form of therapy. It's not physical therapy, but it's a form of therapy, because it helps them to start to think about what's really upsetting them, what's getting to them, what's getting under their skin, and also helps them to really look forward and think about the future. What are they trying to get back to? And a lot of times athletes for kind of lose sight of that 1 month into their ACL rehab, when they haven't run, and their identity has basically been stripped from them. So the ACL RSI is like an awesome tool. And what's cool too, Max, is like all these subjective feedback type of things that coaches are using with their athletes now. Like, hey, how hard was that workout? How'd you feel this morning? Whatever. There's a lot of different ones. Those things are astonishingly accurate. Like, we actually have we as in humans, uh, especially if you're trained that way, and you've had these ideas anchored by something, so you understand what a hard workout is, what's not a hard workout. Once you go through those processes, we as humans do a pretty good job of judging how we feel on a day-to-day basis. And that stuff's extremely powerful. And so, I think that using your coach's eye and your coach's brain to talk and communicate and facilitate that conversation as a rehab practitioner is extremely important. And that's like something that I'm extremely passionate about. And that has nothing to do with biomechanics or strength training. It's just about being a human.
You know, you really connected all the dots there, and I don't want to give you too much credit because I don't know if you're heading to pull up. I won't be able to see you on the screen anymore. Um, think about how this conversation has gone, and we talk about prehab. We talk about making combining the bridge between strength, I guess, creating a bridge, getting over the gap, I should say. There we go. I finally got it. Strength and conditioning and
Between the two of us and our expressions here, and it's brutal.
if you guys are still listening, thank you. Right, physical therapy and strength conditioning, or creating that bridge, and we're talking about, like, okay, as a first off, let's be flexible, right? Because as humans, like you just said, we know very well. And if you were to take the program and just remove it and say, does this make sense, logically as a human, I think that would solve a lot of the answers. And then you talk about, okay, there's certain things we can't measure. So maybe technology, but maybe I don't have technology. So I can use things like rate of perceived exertion. How hard was my workout today? So now you're starting to quantify this. And we put it all together. You have the flexibility, you have the prehab, you have the ability to be self aware, you have the bridging the gap between physical therapy and strength conditioning, and you're making it all fit together, right? So it's this universal concept where all these systems are not isolated, they're really just one. And as you know, the way our world works, we like to separate them. But really, if we just are intelligent about what we're doing, we take what we learn and apply those concepts in a flexible manner, and then seek out ways we can better understand those concepts, the better our performance, our physical therapy, and all the above will be. So, I mean, the way you kind of described it really pulled it full circle.
Well, thanks, man. That's the idea here. I think one of the slides that I like to talk about when I'm talking on this subject is uh, it's it's titled athlete centered care, and I've got an athlete in the center, and then all these different people on the outside of it, and it's like who's going to kind of coordinate that? Who's going to put all these different pieces together? And I think oftentimes the physical therapist, or at least I kind of take that role. I think the physical therapist is in a good position to do so because, especially early on in the rehab process, stuff is slow going and you have the opportunity to have better conversation with the athlete in a different way than you do in kind of a team coaching setting. So I think it's extremely important to be able to connect with the person, because if you can't do that and you can't create buy-in and compliance, then none of this is going to work. This is all a waste of time. And so I think that's like the number one thing, really. And then we can get into all the other testing and all that. And I would argue that even if you were at a low budget place, you didn't have any technology whatsoever, if you have a really good rapport and communication with the athlete, you could make a pretty good judgment as to whether they're ready to go back or not. And and I think that talking to people and assessing their confidence is so important. I love that idea of like just looking at somebody and seeing if they're willing to jump off that box. I ask athletes all the time when we like kind of hit a new phase of rehab. I'm like, was today harder than you thought it would be, or how do you think you did? Or and I like to kind of frame it in how did you think you were going to do versus how you did, and that, and it gives me an idea into the inner workings of that athlete. What's their self talk? Are they going home and being hard on themselves, or are they feeling confident? And some athletes, they're really confident. You don't, and they're not actually putting up a facade. That's who they are. Cool. We don't have to worry about it. Other athletes, it's like we really got to kind of build them up and point out the little victories and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, man, it's all about the individual.
Yeah. So I have two questions. They're not really related to the topic. We just they are and they aren't. And they're questions I've gotten repeatedly. And I guess I'll ask the short question first and the long one second. The first
Okay.
one being, I get the question, Max, should I go in and see someone, whether it's a physical therapist, any individual at all, to get like a yearly bodily checkup? I've heard people doing this. I've gotten the question before, and I think they ask it in sense of not tell me what's wrong, but tell me or help me identify things that might be going on or could be going on in the future so I can act now. Because again, you're probably educated more than you're very well versed in this area. And so if I'm a general population, I might not understand my squat pattern, my why my hip hurts. I might not think anything of it. And I've heard the idea of coming in yearly for a checkup. And I don't mean checkup like I'm gonna breathe and cough a couple times kind of deal. I'm talking about a movement checkup, right? Where we're gonna
Yeah.
actually see how things are functioning. I'm curious your opinion on that, and how you would address such questions.
I've seen this floated as a PT advocacy type thing in the context of, dentists see people twice a year. Why don't we do that? Um, First of all, I don't think it's in the scope of most PTs and their training because we're not taught how to assess healthy people. We're taught how to assess injuries and body parts. Um, I don't, in the same light that we mentioned earlier, you look at the research on the FMS, it doesn't predict injury. I would have a lot of trouble really advocating strongly for it. I do think that somebody like myself could definitely help in some athletes' self management. So if I have like a young power lifter, sometimes I think the knowledge that I can impart on them in an hour is a lot more helpful than the hundreds of hours they've spent poking around YouTube and blogs. So I think that there's some value. I think there's value in having a relationship with a movement professional that you can come to ask questions, and you can come to maybe not when you're hurt, but when you have something that you're curious about. But I don't think a required or regular yearly checkup is always necessary.
I like that approach. The answer I've kind of given is go to someone who's looking to facilitate. And what I mean by that is I think
Mm.
people are hesitant to say, "Oh, I don't want to go here or there because they might, sign me up for 10 sessions right then and there." And how I look
Right.
at it, if you have a trusted like movement specialist that you can see, and they say, "You know what? Something's going on that foot. I don't know. That's not my cup of tea. I want you to go see X, Y, and Z." Maybe you under your own interpretation, you say, "I think it's something dietary going on based on our conversation. Go see this RD I know." And so I like that approach, Teddy, we were talking about. It's not go see a physical therapist, don't see it. It's not an individual entity, but it's seeing someone who's versed enough to say,
Mhm.
okay, this is what I see. Maybe I'll just give you advice because you don't have to have something wrong. Right? I think people go, I'm like, oh, what's wrong? Like,
Yeah.
you're fine. Like, you're good. But maybe we could, the advice of, I think you should get a personal trainer to actually, watch over your form, assuming it's someone who's not as well versed in that area. And I like that idea that you kind of had there. I guess my second question kind of piggybacks off that, and it's a harder question for yourself because you're in the field directly, and it's a question I get a lot. It's how do I find the right physical therapist for myself?
You know, it's not one and done. I would say that the majority of the people that I work with have been to another physical therapist before me. And I think that you have to continue to shop around and know what you're looking for. And if the person's a good fit, you want them to have some sort of experience in or background working with and or personal experience in whatever activity or thing that you're doing. So you don't your physical therapist doesn't have to trap our deadlift 600 pounds to help you with their deadlift. But if they don't know anything about if they've never worked with lifters, I mean, they're probably not going to be very helpful for you. So there are also, some online kind of so Clinical Athlete is a an online resource that Quinn Hennick put together a couple years ago, and with very very good intentions to kind of gather um, a group of physical therapists that kind of they pass the first test in my mind of do you give a shit? If you're on that website, you're paying a fee. I think it's like $10 a month, and you're purposely putting yourself out there. So you already passed that first question, like, do you care? Because a lot of practitioners don't really, they're just busy. And then you got to be willing to shop around, man. Like I get this stuff all the time on DM and in comments. Like I think somebody last week said, my physical therapist won't do any of this stuff with me. And I replied, well, you're free to find another physical therapist and exercise your independence as a healthcare consumer. Like it's not like you're married to that physical therapist. So I understand it's a pain in the butt to go meet new people, find somebody new. Like it's, and then you don't even know if it's going to be the right one, but you shouldn't stay in a relationship out of comfort. You shouldn't stay with your physical therapist out of comfort, So
That's a great way of putting it. Because not right, what one physical therapist is best for might not be the same that another is best for. I
Yeah.
also think on that same coin, I've seen this a ton of times, is have some patience too. Like you're not going to be better
Yeah.
in one. Like it's physical therapy. It's gonna be work
Right, right.
involved, effort, and I think at times it's great to shop around. And don't get me wrong, I agree with you. But it's also, give it a try. Like actually put in the work. Evaluate yourself. Am I doing my home exercises they gave me? Am I actually giving a shit about them? Like am I trying?
Right,
Um,
right.
you answer no to those, and then you answer no to the fact you're not really paying attention, or you know what else is going on, or how your expectations, then maybe it's a self-evaluation before it's an evaluation of physical therapist, because you're only going to get as healthy as you want to be. And I think you
Yeah.
probably have seen that more times than not. That's like, hey, it's been 2 sessions. No, your ACL hasn't healed yet. Like, I'm not a
Yeah.
miracle worker. I apologize. Unfortunate, but it's a process, and I think that's
Yeah.
an important mindset to have.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways that you can approach an issue too, and so sometimes you'll get somebody who is kind of trying their own thing at the same time and not totally bought into what the PT is trying to do, and um, it's not always like that's not always helpful either. Trying to kind of hodgepodge this plan. So I think you really have to, like you said, you really have to buy in and give it a fair shot. um and it's tough to find a good physical therapist if you are looking to perform at a high level for reasons that we spoke about earlier. There's just not a lot of PTs like that out there.
Yes, I mean, I agree. Like it takes a unique group to have that background of, I'm trying to get back to elite performance, and it's it's someone who has to have multiple domains of experience, because performance isn't pain, like you said. It's
Right.
not, a manual muscle test of 5 of 5. It's very, very much encompassing. So I think the famous line is, it takes a village to raise a child, right? It doesn't just take one person. And, you know, I'm sure Teddy, you've spoken about it too. It's not just you who's being the guy, getting the performance. It's that person. It's that person's support system. It's who else they're working with. This, the sport coach obviously plays a role. Like
Yeah.
they have to be on the right page too, and that whole thing has to fit together. Um, we're kind of, it's getting a little long. I don't want to hold you up because I know you're out on the East Coast there. So I got some questions for you to help wrap this up. And first off, Teddy, for people who, if you don't follow him on Instagram, I'm not sure how you're listening to this podcast. But if you don't follow him on Instagram, his Instagram handle is Strength Coach Therapy. But what other things, or where else can we find you? Where can we listen to some of your talks? I know you're like a world traveler presenter. You're going around the globe. So if you're stopping by someone's neck of the woods, where can they find that? How can they reach out to you to possibly host something yourself? And thirdly, I think that's third, maybe fourthly. Lastly, we'll say, I don't know what number it is. Citizen
Well,
athletics, I believe it's called, right? I want you to talk about that at the end. Look at yeah, that wasn't planned, people. That was, for those listening, Teddy zipped his sweatshirt, and he's got a Citizen Athletics T-shirt on. It's almost like he's getting ready for one of the slam dunk competition things, where the guy takes off the jersey on top, and he
exactly,
has
exactly.
a retro player. But I want you to talk about those three. So again, where to find more of you, where to hear from you, how to reach out to you, and then Citizen Athletics.
Where to find more of me? So I'm doing. Well, I'll list a couple events I'm doing this spring. UMBC is a local school here, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I'm going to be doing a talk there at their sports performance seminar coming up in June. That's June 1. I'll be out at Notre Dame at their sports performance seminar the third weekend of June. I'm not sure which day I'm speaking. It's a Friday, Saturday thing. So I'm doing some more kind of like strength and conditioning talks about managing injured athletes and that sort of thing. I also teach my own courses, and so that's a 2-day. It's typically a 2-day course. I'll be in Toronto the first weekend of April. I'll be with Jacob Harden then. I'll also be out in Portland the first weekend of June. The second weekend of June, because the first weekend is University of Maryland. So Prehab 101 is 2 days with me, with yours truly, and we go over like all sorts of kind of expanding on what Max and I talked about earlier, and these concepts of prehab, and we talk about periodization and rehab and tons of case studies, and we go over a lot of unique exercises and ways to load people as well. Maybe not unique exercises, but unique ways to load and avoid pain. Other than that, I think the best way, I've done probably 15 or 20 podcasts, I'm guessing. I think the best way to find me would just be to Google my name and podcasts. If I had my wits about me, I would have all of that gathered in one place. I'm actually in the process of working with a new website person because the old one didn't quite work out. So that's always a challenge, as I'm sure you can understand, Max. Just the whole internet and where do you list all your stuff, and so other than that, let's see. So you asked me about those things. Citizen Athletics is an online training company that I started with my good friend and very smart physical therapist and strength coach, Sam Spinelli. He's the strength therapist. But Sam and I started Citizen Athletics. We launched our first training program last August. And it's a online training program. It's a monthly membership, and it's just solid training. It's just well organized, well put together. Videos for everything. You can message us through this system. It's kind of like an inner circle because you can message us and hit us up and ask us some questions. Whereas I can't maintain a marriage and also sit at home at night on my DMs answering everybody's questions. So it's a way to kind of prioritize my time a little bit and help people that are willing to help support me. And so Citizen Athletics is awesome. I think it's a really solid training program out there that sometimes we're up against these like Instagram models that don't have any business writing training programs. So other than that, man, I'm just traveling, teaching. My new website should be launched pretty soon. That'll be teddywillsey.com, and that'll have most of my like teaching travels type stuff on it.
And for those of you listening, Teddy's name obviously is spelled Teddy. That's Teddy. And last name Willsey is Willsey. And for those of you watching or listening and not watching, I clearly read that off of a phone because I didn't want to butcher it. And so, Teddy, we got your name up on here as well. It's
Perfect.
been awesome to have you. Again, if you guys don't follow him, I don't know what rock you're living under, but go follow him, check him out. He does awesome work, and he does an amazing job utilizing the G Flight. No shameless plug there, right? And it's great having you here because when you talk about performance, strength conditioning, and all the above, it's very much a middle ground, holistic approach. And so, Teddy, thank you once again. Really appreciate it. And it's kind of funny how this world works. We started off a couple of years ago on Instagram, and I had Teddy Thursdays back when Teddy had 9 followers, and now he's up there in some millions of followers or something like that. So I guess
I used to do a post every Thursday for you, and I would always cite a research article in the post.
Oh, those were the times.
Research Thursdays, yeah.
But it's been amazing to see him grow, his community grow, and rightfully so, because he has, the information that people need. And so if you have a chance, go check him out. If you're in the area to listen to him, go listen to him. He's a nice dude. He's a lot taller than I expected. I met him and I thought he was gonna be like 5'8", and he was like 6'2", and he's built like a brick shit house. So caught me off guard on that one. But it's if you got a chance, go meet him. He's an awesome guy. So thank you once again, Teddy.
Max, thanks for having me on, man. This is awesome. And it's been a pleasure to connect with you early on and continue to connect. And it was great to hang out and train together in February. And I hope to do it again soon, man.
Oh, you're always welcome, bud. All right, take care. Thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it, and hope you guys tune in next time. Thanks.